Okay. All right, everybody, thank you for coming. We are going to get started. We might have a few other people joining during the presentation, but it's now 7:07. So this is a presentation by the Kansas Green Party on community solar and the Microgrid Act. My name is Nick Blessing. I'm the Secretary of Kansas Green Party, and we'll be hearing a presentation from our co-chair, Kent Rowe. And we're going to go until about 8:30 tonight. We might end earlier than that, but that's going to be roughly our cutoff. I think Kent's presentation will be, how long do you think your presentation will take, Kent?
Oh, about 40 minutes, something like that, yeah, maybe less.
That'll be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and just general discussion about the topics. If you, during the presentation, feel free to, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to just put it in the chat, and we'll address them after the presentation is over. And then also after the presentation, if you would like to raise your hand by going to the reactions button on the Zoom web application, you can raise your hand, or if you do the thumbs up or something else, I'll take that as raising your hand as well. And you can, and we'll call on you to speak, and we'll take any questions or comments in the order that people raise their hands. Without any further ado, Kent, take it away.
Well, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I would like to thank the Green Party of Kansas for this opportunity to present here tonight. The assemblage of knowledge, however, is a representation of work on behalf of Kansas Sierra Club, a Society of Alternative Resources, and countless individuals contributing to this content. I'll go to share screen now. And can you all see this on your screens?
Yes.
Okay. Well, very good. I'd like to start out by putting all of this in perspective of who we are and where we are, and we're born of this land. So I'll say something in Chickasaw that might have an impact on all of our psyche with respect to our living on the land. Chipota ikpa nanish talat kalea opa. Your children and grandchildren rejoice. Imaa akilo ha in kana chokma imi la hobby iya home hobby. Act bravely, friendly, a certain way. Itito mo okakli chi ihala. Make drum beats, dance happily. Anaisha yaakni, to heal the earth. Ayopa ilo china, for your happiness. Yeah, that is a way that I would hope we could start a lot of meetings, and to recognize what we have done in this land in our lifetimes and how we can make things more resilient and lasting and without further destruction of the earth. This is about this first part one, there's a part two also, is about neighborhood solar and electricity generation. Part two will be constructing a resiliency hub, which we responded to during this, I think April 29th, was it? Andover tornado. Neighborhood solar can be part of a customer generator. You can be a transactive energy generator. You can have resiliency in a neighborhood. In other words, if everything is knocked out, all your power is down for X amount of time, there is at least one place in an area that can keep running. Refrigeration for people with prescription drugs that may need it, be refrigerated. Some electricity, people on oxygen that might require that power, and other critical functions. Another one is solar for all schools. Schools can become these resiliency hubs as well. And we're beginning to see that. There's a big campaign, of course, on the coasts and other places with the advent of electric school buses that can add to the storage times and such, and low emission zones to establish that. And that, to me, and by my research, is the most cost benefit ratio improvement, because it cuts down on emergency room visits due to allergy, asthma, breathing ailments, and heart disease. And yes, indeed, the animal world is pretty angry with us. The raccoon clan, Ikchashani, or their leaders are chosen. They have all kinds of fruit. They eat all. They're clever and cunning, and they cannot be fooled. So the raccoon clan has a lot of followings, but also they have selected the leaders from the Ikshashani. The Texas Property Code is where we start, and that is where otherwise provided by subsection D in the Texas Property Code, and about half the states do have this. A property owners association, may not include or enforce in a dedicatory instrument that prohibits or restricts a property owner from installing a solar energy device. In other words, homeowners association cannot just specifically ban solar because they don't like solar. And I say about half the states have this property code. Certainly California does, with the proclamation that all new construction must have solar contained in it. And that couples with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Rule 2222 back in September of 2020 allows aggregators of solar and wind, electric vehicles, battery storage, and other energy storage resource, DER, distributed energy resources, to compete in regional wholesale electric markets. Some state legislators, though, have voted to opt out of these organized markets. Kansas, so far, is not one of those states. The Microgrid Act, House Rule 2482 of the 117th Congress, is kind of cool because I don't know who coined this anachronism. Maybe it was Jimmy Panetta himself or his staff. Microgrid, making imperiled communities resistant to outages with generation that is resilient, islandable, and distributed Act. Again, keep that in mind, making imperiled communities resistant to outages. So they can actually sell their excess generation on the wholesale market at more than a fair price than what an investor-owned utility would certainly steal from them. And I say steal because if you look at the time in which the manner in which that is done, it is very clearly theft of excess energy. Also, House Rule 4559, Department of Defense, the Colorado House Bill 22-1249, Microgrid Roadmap, authored by Tracy Burnett, you might want to check out too. So how does it make money? It's known as net metering. Now we have net metering here with a large investor-owned utility. The sun hits the light rays. Solar panels turn sunlight into electricity. It's all pretty germane stuff. Your electrical panel sends power to your home. Excess energy flows out through your meter, like making it run backwards, of course. And the excess power to your generate results in a credit from the utility towards your bill. But again, I say with FERC 2222, you can actually sell that excess power at a fair rate. And this is kind of germane. This comes out of the California Independent System Operator, the duck curve. And this is where the load profile of the state or region, it's like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, but it kind of holds true too for a lot of major areas that utilize solar. You'll see here at the bottom, over generation risk. That's where you need this at certain hours of the day while the sun is shining and the load perhaps is somewhat low. People not utilizing too much electricity, and the cycle of their routines and their daily lives is fairly benign. But starting at about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, we have to ramp up 13,000 megawatts or 13 gigawatts in 3 hours. Where is that power going to come from? Well, oftentimes that's where coal plants have to ramp up. Gas-fired turbines have to fulfill that need. But with storage and battery technology and utilizing what I'm going to explain here called V2G and other techniques, changes the load shape implementation and part of those 10 strategies. It's also called the teaching the duck to fly. You can see that it decreases that ramp up, and that these strategies can balance the load over the hours that are needed the most. And what happens during these hours is fluctuations in frequency regulation of the power grid. That 60 cycles per second becomes unstable, leading to a loss of a lot of equipment and the failure, which I'll explain in detail in a little bit. The duck curve is just as important on how much rooftop or backyard solar is produced, but also when it is generated. And you can see here, this is a dashboard from our rural cooperative. These peaks are what we are using. This is our demands that we utilize in certain hours. Here down on the negative is our generation, either from wind or solar. Sometimes at night, our solar does not generate, the wind does not blow, so we're back up in here and utilizing, but utilizing at night generally is not the case. So if you're not on a dashboard with your own electricity, you should be, and your load profile as well as your generation will look like this. That we're fortunate, and this was a really good month. It's very windy, so we generated at night a pretty steady pace, as well as the solar during the day. So this is what a dashboard, and most utilities, if not all of them, provide this service for you. This couple of summers, we've tried to invest and recruit people in minority areas, blacks in solar, and certainly the Tribal Solar Acceleration Fund for reservations and tribal lands. We tried to organize neighborhoods to educate, train, install solar panels and thereby benefit from these. Contour of these roofs is that you have to leave a bit of room. You can't just go to the peak. Most people know this rule, but you can certainly put in, and solar panels are not only getting lower in price, but also increasing in their capacity and capacity factors. But keep in mind, where are these solar panels built? Who builds them? Is it made by slave labor? Are they using materials that have to be mined by unsavory means, using child labor, and causing a lot of pollution? So we try to buy solar panels that we have documentation and a reputable company that knows to come by these panels in a humane way. They can be mounted on garden sheds, backyards, tool sheds, anything you can do that has a south or west facing orientation. You can put up. Now, I've been seeing some that are not so well placed, and they're placed in areas of a lot of trees. Now, we like shade, but in the wintertime, a lot of the leaves fall off, and allowing some to go through. Now, when there's too much shade, I don't know, they don't do that much good, other than you have to use what's called optimizers, or go to the mini inverters, micro inverters underneath each solar panel, which adds a bit of cost to these. And you can see here's a nice one. It's in bare opening area. He's charging his vehicle right directly from that solar production in those hours, as to avoid the demand charges that will show up on a electricity bill. Here's a simple solution to or design to a carport that one can build, even if your home is not facing and oriented in the right correct direction, maybe east and west. The carport can be built without a lot of expense and trouble to mount solar panels atop this to perpendicular orientations to face the south and southwest. Solar Jobs guidebook by the Grid Alternatives. They're the ones that sponsor the Tribal Solar Acceleration Fund, which has really taken off a lot. Tribes don't like to have over the land power lines. They certainly don't like, and we've learned lately, they don't like, or we don't like the pipelines going through the lands, especially if it's not directly benefiting anybody except some stockholders. Women at work have been found to find a lot of avocation in solar construction, solar installation. This I find remarkable, because here is a group of women who really take pride and are getting a lot of benefit out of it. These jobs are certainly available, and you can strike out as your own contractor or part of a growing market. Some areas are sponsoring solar energy free events. I'd like to start doing that here locally in Wichita or the state as part of the Workforce Development Center. Good poster there to these kinds of events. And here, most shamefully, are the score rankings of solar on policies. I see here by the another public integrity the Kansas ranks about the same, 45. This one says 48 in policy for installation of solar. There are various reasons for this, that we have a legislature that is bankrolled by the oil and gas industry, which is, and they do fight a lot of initiatives that we have tried to put up for getting solar off the ground in Kansas. We have so much to offer with solar and wind, but we're still number 48. By the way, if you haven't heard already, the Kansas Renewable Energy Fair, October 3rd and 4th, is now taking registrations. I think it's $100 to attend both days. That's going to go up in price after Saturday, I think, to 125 or so. So if you haven't attended one of these, it's quite good. A lot of presentations, seminars, booths, and so forth, that you learn a tremendous amount. And it hasn't been held for a couple of years because of the COVID difficulties, but yet it is on for this year at Manhattan, Kansas State University. Now, local energy aggregation. How does this work? CCA is community choice aggregation, buying and building electric supply, delivering it to the utility. The utility has to maintain their lines. They have to do the billing of customers, but they can also choose to be an aggregator. Or you can choose another outside party to be an aggregator, to sell electricity that you've generated in excess during certain hours, especially when it's needed the most. The customer is benefiting from affordable rates, local control, and cleaner energy. And that is key to keeping a strong community. Rather than your monies going out of state or out of community, you keep it in the community when you have a community choice aggregator. And this is just kind of a standard thing of the smart grid. What we're doing now, digital technology, monitoring and control, outage management systems, power quality management, renewable energy, electric vehicles can lead to energy storage. And it strengthens the buffer between a wide scale cyber attack on a utility grid when you have microgrids or mini grids in your community. Here's what it looks like. I think this is Britain, somewhere in Europe. These are V2G vehicles, and there's nothing special. They're just electric vehicles that are connected to chargers, but also at a certain time of the day, maybe 3-4 hours at the most, a certain amount goes back this way towards the chargers into a facility, office building, business, or critical infrastructure, and they can avoid the peak demand charges that a large utility would otherwise incur onto them. This could be also used as a resiliency protection in case of widespread power outages, such as floods and storms and the like. And here it is. This is kind of off in reverse, but this is the Nissan Leaf. It has the CCS, combined charging system on this side. But over here is the large 400 volt bidirectional charger called the CHAdeMO, Charge de Move in French, that allows for that bidirectional charging. Up until just recently, this has been the only vehicle, and some of the other Asian-built vehicles that have this feature that allows bidirectional, in other words, backflowing to your home, backflowing to a VG charger into a local grid. CHAdeMO. But now I understand a lot of the vehicle manufacturers are going with bidirectional CCS. Tesla and some of the others have announced this. But also for your home, the Quasar 2 bidirectional charger is now on the market. I did see the first national advertisement for the Quasar 2 bidirectional charger. That is, I understand they're going to sell for around $4,000, pretty steep price for all of these. Now, you might be asking yourself too, okay, what does that do to my battery life? Well, yes, there are some issues perhaps, but a Honda representative has said, keep your batteries moving, keep it charging, keep it discharging, avoid heat and high charge rates on hot days. So I don't know about the total data, but also I do know that battery chemistries are changing. Battery outages will be less of an issue. And I'll mention that too here in a little bit. Well, here's some, you can't see this entire graph here. Spinning reserves from to meet base load could be, like I said, a coal plant that has to be kept running 24 hours a day to meet that base load, meet that rise in load demand. And the V2G, vehicle to grid, is that load shifting, peak power shifting that does alleviate this devastating load shift. And I say devastating because this little graph here on harmonics on the line. Harmonics are a distorted sine wave. You can have first, third, second, and third harmonics that leads to nonlinear load currents, and that this gives a lot of problems, especially on the three phase. Those phase angles become distorted, and what happens? It costs industry and maybe your refrigerator. Neutral wires on three-phase systems overheat. They exceed the IEEE standards. The false tripping of branch circuits. And again, heat generation on stator cores of motors, electric motors. Harmonic currents in pole faces and armature windings. Higher core temperatures and higher winding temperatures. Right there. Speaking a little electrical engineering terminologies, this is how non-completely sinusoidal waves can really affect a power grid. And you can just see the top of this down here, plug-in electric vehicles to meet load. Well, the blue line, the total load would be up here, but maybe the V2G under certain hours can meet that demand. And this is what I like, going back up here with this harmonic distortion. That's what I like about large wind turbines, because they have the inertia that's churning on a line. Those blades move, and they have that force that is really good to keeping these things steady. But with solar farms and large solar farms, as it's been mentioned before, clouds can come over large solar farms and decrease that production. They can have other kinds of distorted windstorm, rainstorms. But if it's distributed throughout residential areas, larger areas, that tends to balance those loads and that production from solar. So I'm trying to make the case that distributed resources is better than concentrated or centralized sources. And you're democratizing the grid. Here's a photograph we snapped up and showed some of the state legislators. I'm sure it went to nowhere, but some of them did listen about the farm economy. And sure enough, I think it was, Jesse and I went to the Sedgwick County Fair parade, and we thought we'd be the only ones there with an electric vehicle. But no, there was the people from the Sedgwick County Extension Office showed up with a Rivian pickup truck, all electric, and that was to my surprise. So those kinds of things are beginning to come into fruition. Of course, the Ford F-150 Lightning is on the market now, and they're beginning to see that long distances traveled with goods or just picking up parts and so forth without using any fossil fuels is becoming more popular. Robotics on the farm, things you can charge that will run through a field for one purpose or another. I'd like to think that this was cultivating plants that weeds out rather than using a spray, or it's just inspecting the condition of the plants so that they'll know maybe where more, or to put more irrigation if it's irrigated, or fertilizer, and so forth. And the John Deere company chimes in too. This is a robotic tillage appliance, a field appliance that is all robotic. You can see the antennae that probably does a better Rowe than if you're cultivating and you're in a cab of a tractor and you're drinking beer all afternoon. Well, you kind of get all funky. I've seen this with planting, where the rows get a little crookeder more time goes off in the afternoon. Either you're getting tired or you're finished with that 6-pack of beer. And again, I'll come back to this ultra low emission zones that cities are declaring these areas that have high emissions zones, and it has the highest, I think, cost benefit analysis ratio of all, because you're cutting down on emergency room visits from people, children, and older adults that have respiratory problems. So here's the thing. What about service trucks? What about vehicles that need to go into neighborhoods, delivering mail, emptying rubbish, and so forth? Well, we can have hybrid ones, series hybrid, like the Chevy Volt, that enter into a neighborhood of low emission zones on electric, do everything they need to do, make deliveries, pick up rubbish, whatever it is, pick up school kids. And if it's a hybrid, it can travel long distances when it's out of the area of high concentrations of air pollution and contamination, and resume on diesel fuels. Although Volvo has a truck that can do these tasks, it's a 565 kilowatt battery on that Volvo truck that they've mentioned. That these kind of things are now coming. And this is the Bollinger pickup truck. I just threw that in there to let you know that these kinds of vehicles are coming online. Okay, part 2. This is the Andover tornado, April 29th. And I'll talk about how we are now what's called a resiliency hub. I don't know if you can see this image. I snapped this from our front porch. It's off to the east and a little bit north. The tornado that struck Andover on April 29th, it was beginning to wane and become less of a threat, but it was still viable. A little bit of darkness right in here. You can see my arrow. that's the debris cloud that's still going on. They had to close Andover Road for many miles because it threw boards, nails, all kinds of debris onto the roadway. So they had to use mile over where we were to reroute traffic. So the first thing I had to do on April 29th is I pulled this out. Our power went completely out, and my partner was completely unnerved by the tornado. I kept trying to tell her it was moving away, it's nothing, no problem. But we got the communications back up with the television, the antenna television, with this. It's a little power inverter. Some of you have seen it. We bring it around to some of the events, and a solar. It was still a solar panel, foldable. Still goes. It has the inverter on it. It has the sealed lead acid batteries inside of it, and a 110 volt pure sine wave inverter coming out. The next thing I had to do was, and I had just purchased this pure sine wave. It's my Jupiter watt inverter, and I connected that to the 12 volt battery on the electric car. Now, most of you probably, some of you may not realize it, but the electric vehicles still have 12 volt batteries contained in them, and to just to run the SAE electronics and so forth, like most cars do. But I put it in drive mode. It didn't move, kept it in park. That way, the power from the battery, the larger 24 kilowatt hour battery in the electric car, ran through the 12 volt battery into the inverter. And there you can see the 110 volt outlets. And it's important to have a pure sine wave inverter because one fits all. They're a little bit more expensive, but sometimes electronics and so forth don't work very well on a non-pure sine wave inverter. So that was the next thing I did. Plugged in and got the internet going back. This is the switch in our home, and this holds true for any data center that a hospital is dependent upon, or a substation, electrical power substation depends on. They look a little different than this, but same kind of principle. So we got that up and running. Then we had out in the rural area where we're at, the antenna performs the communications to the switch or internet signals. Then, not knowing how long the power was going to be out, I wheeled this thing out. And this is the gas generator. It works on both gasoline and propane. I haven't put gasoline in this, but I had some to spare to utilize it. We had no idea how long the power grid locally was going to be out. It has, it's called the dual fuel propane and gasoline. It is a 15,000 watts on gasoline. It produces a peak watts and 13,500 peak watts on propane. Now, why propane? Because most of these things just sit around most of the time. Unless you run them periodically, it just doesn't pay. And so gasoline goes bad. Gasoline evaporates, leaves a residual, and so forth, and gives problems to a motor. This has a V-twin motor, and it's a 50 amp machine. And you can see here the frequency right here, frequency 60.7, good enough, pure sine wave. We can charge the vehicles. We can charge batteries. We can do a lot of different functions with this. So if you buy a generator for a neighborhood to go on to be a resiliency hub, make sure it can generate 60 cycles per second. And here's where we connect it up to the large propane tank that we have on site. There's the valve, then there's the standard connection, just like you have in a propane bottle, that connects to the generator itself, and the valve is in the on position. Then that 50 amp cord from the generator goes into something called an inlet box. An inlet box is different than an outlet box. Use only an inlet box to go to your mains in your breaker box. And this is of course, the transfer switch from the inlet box. It has certain circuits already pre-designated. We have our HVAC system connected here in case we needed it for cooling or heating in the winter. We had lights, refrigeration, all kinds of critical loads that we would need in the house with a long-term outage. And you have the switch in the off position, line position, or generator position. So these are the breakers for that. And you have to be careful not to exceed the load of 50 amps. But with our HVAC system, we have the mini split, the heat pumps. We removed 60 amp breaker with the air conditioner, old air conditioner that we had, and we replaced it with a 25 amp breaker. So there was still plenty of amperage left of 50 amps that could run other systems, including refrigeration at the same time. And as addition to that, so we could cut down on the amount of runtime that we have with the finite fueled gas generator, there's the SMA solar inverter. And this is connected to what's called the feature of the SMA, the secure power supply, SPS. So that when the sun is shining and you're generating some solar, this will give you up to 2,000 watts of electricity directly from the solar panels when the power or the grid is down. And then you can plug into these two outlets, charge batteries, charge vehicles without having to run or decreasing the runtime. And this in principle is the same as V2G, in which a massive power outage you can still run directly off of a solar bank. And here are the LG heat pumps. This is at the Wichita State University that we see here. And these are about equivalent of a large, what they call package unit that's on top of buildings. They have a smaller size, a much smaller load demand, and can operate in reverse. They generate both AC, air conditioning, cooling, and heating. So we're getting to see these on campus at Wichita State finally. It'd be nice to have the solar backups to these and other means of running these. And here's my test bed that I built for running a mini split. Here you can see the cord running directly to the mini split heat pump in our backyard. By the way, we ran an Airbnb for many years, and with COVID we had to shut down. So very successful Airbnb. Sometime perhaps we'll start up again. 3 to 6 solar panels will run these things directly, these heat pumps without having to recruit any power from the grid. But you can see here, there is a power box that's connected to the grid at nighttime if we still need it, or we could run it on battery during times of clouds. For these applications, and this is not ours, I just took a stock photo of a solar tracker. This one has 6 or more solar panels, and it tracks the sun. You'll get much better generation if you can have a solar tracker connected to the mini split heat pumps. And here's this is from YMGI that has the solar panel wiring block right here. You connect right directly to this wiring block from the solar panels, as well as the 208, 230 volt single phase 60 cycle power right here. Now these things do run on 230, 220 volt, but they switch down to 208 volts for their operation. And this one is the hotspot unit model right there, the solar panel connections directly to those units. Again, this not only allows you to have backup power resiliency, but it also in peak demand times, which are using for hot water, heating, cooling, you could be selling your generation. You'll be essentially off grid during those times and realize a better return, quicker payback time on your investments. And those, another one, this is the upper deck of the other house, just adjacent to the larger one, the 3 600-watt Coleman wind turbines. They're sold under the name of Coleman, but they're built in Taiwan, sold through a company called Sunforce in Canada. So I run 3 of these when the wind is blowing, which is just about all of the time. And here is the control panel for those. These are the stop switches. They're in the stop position now. And these are the switches for connecting to battery banks, as well as a smaller inverter to go directly onto grid. That's how we can generate at night, oftentimes. So pretty simple. These are the controllers for those wind turbines, and of course the amperages that they're achieving ongoing, with fuses in line, so forth. Pretty neat. This is the same as a military design. That's where I got the idea for this. The military does use these in forward staging areas, field hospitals, communications, and data centers in military operations. And here I just connected up. I'll be upgrading someday to lithium ion or more efficient batteries. These are lead acid deep cycle batteries connected in parallel, 12 volts. Each of these is 12 volts connected to each other, giving a 12 volt 488 amp hours was what these are rated at. So we can also run these. They can be charged again by a generator or by solar or by wind, multi modes of keeping on charge. Here's one. These are just a smaller sealed lead acid batteries that are 48 volts. This one actually indicates 51.5 volts. And these are connected in series, positive to negative, positive to negative, positive to negative. And on these ends, there's their positive pole, there is the negative pole to give nominally 48 volts. Why 48 volts? Because the mini splits demand it, and a lot of practical applications demand 48 volts. So this it comes from the Microgrid Design Toolkit, the user guide. Sandia National Laboratories near Albuquerque. You check out the site. Kirtland Air Force Base has a state-of-the-art microgrid running, and they've got a really good report on that, as well as the knowledge database, microgridknowledge.com. 2022 papers are now available. The Microgrid conference took place in Philadelphia, but this year it's going to be in Anaheim in May 2023 in Anaheim, California. So that is it. That's what I have. Please give me some questions and be happy to attempt to answer. Thank you for your attention. Holger.
Yeah, that was first of all just applause. Thank you for the presentation, but I also do have a question actually. So, you know, you have so thanks for a really interesting presentation. You have a setup that already incorporates wind and solar and vehicle to grid and diesel or fuel generator. And you have different kinds of battery storage, you have different kind of load management, you have access to your production and consumption data on a fine-grained scale. So awesome. But what if somebody just wants to get started and can only do one thing? It's I guess the answer I know for myself is, yeah, you can definitely, you know, build up piece by piece, and each piece you add brings incremental value. But walk us through how you started and how you recognized what else you needed and wanted and so on. How, you know, somebody who's just, you know, connected to Evergy and maybe concerned, how does somebody get started?
I suppose the first thing you have to consider is whether or not your area, your home, is amenable to solar production. I've made some suggestions to some people. It can be, if your rooftop is not available, if it's an older rooftop, you might consider a carport or backyard. You saw on some of the photos where I built my own ground mounts, and I've had them up for years in windstorms and all kinds of turbulence. I started out with the thin film solar panels quite some time ago, 2015. I wanted to try those out because of their pliability. The other ones that I bought were used. They were $53 a piece, delivered. They looked like the old military ones, the Suntech, but it's hard to say where they came from. And I was unsure on their peak production, but man, they do perform. And I'm not sure how longer they'll last, but some of them needed a few connectors replaced, which I did for pennies. Others might have a little box behind, a little cleanup, which was done. And we had a cool day, clouds, and then the clouds came out and they went well over their rated capacity. The other thing you can do is purchase either a plug-in hybrid electric car or fully electric vehicle. That's your battery storage. That way you can go off grid for the most part whenever you choose. And when you're generating solar, and be sure you try out that SMA inverter. That's the only one on the market I know that will generate power directly from the sun to a couple of 110, 120 volt outlets, pure sine wave. And that incorporates really outside of the initial investment of a solar system all you really need. And you can do it in your backyard. You can do it on a carport. It breaks my heart when I see all these roof lines facing the south. They're bare. They're not doing anything. And I see this in apartments. I see this in homes and so forth. So yeah, very small investment, the DIY, especially if you're going to be off grid part of the time. I know it's a hassle with the power company, but there are ways around it. You can get some things done. It's kind of difficult to get that permit, as most of us have had that experience. So anyway, I hope that kind of explains. And then you can ramp up from there if you want to be a resiliency hub, which I think every block should have one, considering what we're facing now with climates and storms and so forth. And Terry, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Thank you for the great presentation. Now then, let me ask you, are you off the grid or are you still plugged into Evergy at your house?
We're on the Butler Rural Electric Cooperative. I'm glad you asked. The cooperatives are much more friendly to solar being fed into their grid. They are invested and they encourage it. If we get the little monthly magazine on it, and they always talk about the advantages of solar, especially in the rural areas. I'm so happy that we are not part of an investor-owned utility, and they're very aware. We went to the conference a couple of years ago too, right before COVID, and one of the recipients of the scholarships got up and said, "We don't want coal. I'm the younger generation. We've got to stop this." Very brave girl, got up in front of a crowd of several hundred people. And that made an effect. I think that really made an effect on policy. So they really started the encouragement, and they do have solar. They have two large 1 megawatt solar farms each that they have built. But again, I caution you about large centralized solar farms because of the if the tornado decided to go over to those, which this last one wasn't that far away, that would have knocked out that source. But if you have distributed solar being backfed to the grid, then you might have a chance to have some load sharing in those situations.
Okay, so with the setup that you have made, if you wanted to just be renewable power, how long would you last before you had to flip the Butler switch?
Well, again, I think it'd be quite, depending on the time of year and the load, but I think we could go indefinitely. Given that our propane tank, we might have to run the generator some, but certainly not as much because we have reliance on storage, the vehicle, the batteries, the wind turbines, and so forth. Again, we run a small food bank and we have refrigerators and freezers that we have to keep going. But I have no doubt in my mind that we could keep on going a very long time, either with no or very little generator support. But again, that depends on the time of the year. We have been down for a week out here, and we're not that far from Andover. We're only a mile and a half north of 21st Street. But we were down for an entire week during an ice storm in 2005, January 2005. So we're ready for that. And you're right, I should do some more experimentation to see how long we go.
Well, are you generating solar all the time? Does your cooperative let you sell that to them?
Yeah, we gladly give that to them.
You give it?
We can look into an aggregator, yeah. Voltus is one such company. the city of Wichita has contracted with Voltus, VOLTUS, and I'm not sure what that relationship is. But if you go down to the transit center with their electric buses, those chargers are V2G. So they must have something going to backfeed onto the grid there.
Let's see. Jesse raised his hand, but we've had some comments. Lori and Terry both put some links in here.
Yeah, Kansas Renewable Energy Conference.
Yeah, Lori's link is for the Kansas Renewable Energy Conference. Registration is open. It's from October 3rd to 4th at the Hilton Garden Inn in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And Terry's link was a Cake News article, robots roaming fields, or part of farmers' larger mission for chemical-free farming.
Yes.
Greenfield Robotics in Chandler, quite close to you, you know.
If anybody's.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you. What did you say?
They cut weeds. They're electric hoers, but Greenfield does it by contract. They bring the robots to you.
And Cynthia had a question that Holger responded to. Why not east-facing roofs versus south/west? And Holger said east-facing is okay if you have demand in the morning hours, or add a little battery storage to just bridge morning production to afternoon consumption. Otherwise, you just rely on the grid as a battery, which also might be okay. You have any other comment on that, Kent?
Yeah, be careful though with if you have east facing or non-solar or sun facing sides, because if you don't employ optimizers on the solar panels, or those little mini inverters on the solar panels, that will drag down the production. The one that's in the shade or doesn't get the most very much sun will force the other ones to its level. So yeah, that can be done, but you have to be wary of the little bit additional cost to employ those devices, so that you're not pulling down it's like one panel gets a shade on it, the rest of them will be pulled down, unless it has those optimizers or mini inverters on the back. In phase, I think it is what the company name is on one of them. So it can be done, and I see them on the north sometimes too, which I it doesn't. And remember too that solar panels do really well when they're cold. They don't do as well when they're hot in the sun. So there might be a case. Solar World might have an article on that, on non-solar side facing solar panels, if it's in a really hot environment. Not sure what that production would be. But again, for backyard applications, if you're limited, and we do have a friend who made a crude solar tracker that she does this with in her backyard, tracking the sun depending on the time of year, the season, the azimuth, the angle, and so forth. Yeah, Jesse.
Sorry, I was trying to lower the hand.
Yeah.
Anyway, the question I had was regarding like individuals who don't own their own homes or their own properties or things like that. I don't know if there's anything kind of preventing one who is, you know, living or renting or living in somebody else's property from, you know, getting solar. I guess that's what my question is, like, are there laws against it, or do I need like approval from the landlord or something like that if I were to install solar?
Yeah, it probably depends on where you want to install it. If it's on your balcony, it could be a wall, perhaps. If it's in your space, I don't see any reason why you couldn't put maybe a solar concentrator or a solar panel, small solar panel. If nothing else, just to run something of a novelty and see what you can do. What would be really keen is on carports, car canopies in these apartments. And they're going to have to reckon with this sometime soon, because a lot of these apartments don't have the capacity, they don't have the voltage to run electric vehicle charging. So that's going to have to be dealt with. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act partly reflects that, but with the Microgrid Act being mentioned in the Inflation Reduction Act, that they're going to have to grapple with. Either rooftop or car canopies on there. There are solutions to these, and it's very basic, very simple.
Like I rent, so I'm in a fortunate situation where I'm not in an apartment, but I am renting the house. So like, would roof mounted panels still be all right then, or like, is that something I need to get permission from the landlord to do or something like that?
I think if you the design I have, they're disassemblable, they're mobile, and you can take them with you if you want to put them in your backyard, if it's amenable to that. That's what I like about that disassembled, locally sourced, standard materials that they use in all kinds of applications, all plumbing and heating and structural. It's just the angled, slotted angle iron is what it is, galvanized, and using cinder blocks to tie it down with plumber's tape and so forth. Just make sure that they will withstand the wind load, gust loads, which I have calculated. They will certainly exceed that in this area.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Holger.
Yeah, so to comment on that last question, in Germany, people are hanging solar panels off their balconies in apartment buildings, and sometimes, just one, sometimes two of them. Sometimes they kind of build some angle bracket and hang one more in front of a wall, however they can mount it in a removable way so that they really don't have to get landlord approval. And in many countries, it's legal to just have a normal plug and plug into the wall. You have only a small amount of production with one or two panels. In Germany, they actually technically require a different connector, but people still just use a normal plug and go into the wall. And usually, you just basically lower your consumption. Most of the time, depending on what all you run in your apartment, you may still draw some electricity from the grid, but not as much as you would without those two solar panels. And if you are not home at noon, you may actually send electricity back into the grid to your neighbors. And depending on the arrangement, you probably don't get any money for it, but at least you can do something to lower your own electricity bill a little bit, and to feel good about it while you don't have any other means to really install something permanent on your rooftop. So that's happening in significant numbers. But I think really it's an important point, and we need regulations. I think we need to have a framework that holds owners accountable to work with tenants and to cost share installations and to have fair frameworks where everybody contributes proportionally to their means and then benefits proportionally to how much they put in. And I think there can be different arrangements, but none of that happens if it's not encouraged and supported by legislation. And that gets me to the other comment I want to make. It's I think we really have solved the energy issue, both for private homes, as Kent has really shown us tonight, as well as for industrial applications. We can have large wind farms, and sure, if you talk to experts, they are going to say we need more storage technology and it's still too expensive and so on. But I really don't agree with that. It can't be too expensive to save the planet and our own asses, frankly, right? So I think we've long ago solved the energy issue. What we haven't solved is the water issue. And so right now, as climate change is causing more drought and correspondingly more intense rainfall in other parts of the world, we see reservoirs are depleting in Norway. Norway, with all its water and secure energy, is not exporting as much electricity to other parts of Europe as other parts of Europe would like since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. France relies on nuclear power that produces heat, where nuclear fuel produces heat that needs to be converted into electricity, and that only works if you have cooling water. But in the drought, rivers are low and you have not enough cooling water available. So nuclear power plants have to be throttled, and there isn't as much electricity in France as they expected. Actually, Germany is exporting renewable energy to France. But also Germany is using old coal-fired power plants again since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, you need to burn quite a bit of coal to keep those things running. That coal isn't transported on trains or trucks, but on large barges on, for example, the Rhine River. But the Rhine River has very low water, and so for months already, those barges had to carry less and less coal per barge, so they wouldn't run aground in the lower water levels, and hence would have to run more often. And it's reaching a point of diminishing returns to have barges that have hardly any coal on board go through these shallow rivers. And so you look basically anywhere around the globe. China right now is experiencing severe droughts, and there are provinces that ration electricity. Industry is impacted by that. So actually, battery production and electric vehicle production are impacted by the drought and the reduced electricity production that causes. So I think these are all very good arguments to try to convince legislators to finally pass those regulations that help us to really have renewable energy take off. Because we know what the solution is, we just need to implement that solution for the energy sector. And it doesn't involve monolithic large plants that produce heat to convert into electricity, which requires water we don't have. And we need to really have the next one of these seminars on water. That's really the issue I'm much more concerned about than electricity. You can have all the cooling and heating and fridge for medication, you run out of water, within a couple of days, you get on the road and move somewhere else. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, critical infrastructure is essentially wastewater treatment and water pumping. I didn't mention that in the resiliency hub. If you have a water well, how is that going to be lifted out of the well and into the household? Now, that's why some people have put in hand pumps. I've seen those in kitchens. And it would be interesting to see this winter in Europe, all the innovation that can take place, because people need to heat water and they need to heat their homes, their apartments, their dwellings. And that putting up a solar collector, hot water collector might be or a combination of photovoltaics and thermal conduction, it might be the answer. But there is a lot of clouds that come through, so we have to be innovative. And I see where Cynthia asked about how do we meet base load. This is a adage that the utility companies always bring up. This is what I'm referring to as that duck curve, that we need to ramp up 13 gigawatts, or at least California does, in certain hours. When people are going home, they're switching off and switching on lights. Frequency regulation is hard pressed and does damage to appliances as well as industrial motors and so forth. Well, this is where we balance it with wind, solar, and efficiencies that we're calling for, and that is contained in the Microgrid Act of the Inflation Reduction Act. Jesse Pantera of California, I think, did a good job on that. But he brought a lot of his knowledge from microgridknowledge.com. That's the professional arm of the microgrid. And if we're sharing that, if we're actually democratizing the grid and decentralizing the grid, I'm really certain that we can meet baseload fairly routinely. Starting up gas turbines still takes a long time because multiple turbines have to be synchronized to the grid, and there can be difficulties there. And if they fail and your battery storage is run out, then you've got total chaotic loss to data centers, wastewater treatment, critical infrastructure, and so forth. That's why I'm saying, and again, people say, well, digging up lithium and so forth is just as bad as petroleum. Well, I would refer you to, what is that site? The Fully Charged put out a really good little video on oil production and all of the water, the carbon, the energy that it takes just to get from the wellhead, actually before the wellhead, exploration, drilling, complete well completion, and on the water that it takes, and the carbon and the expenditures of, and on right on through to the consumer, is a tremendous amount more energy and waste than digging up materials for lithium. Not to mention, though, seabed mining. Seabed mining should not be done. Seabed mining is not a good idea. I think we have more resources than that, and better battery chemistries coming up online. I hope that answers that for you, Cynthia. So, all right, anybody else have any comments? I hope I did you justice. And like I say, yeah, water probably should be another critical topic. They're talking about green hydrogen now. Some of these companies, I think it's just a continuation of fossil fuels, and they're wanting to again utilize gray, brown, so-called green hydrogen to fulfill our needs. So it probably does have its place, but it certainly should not be to scale to take the place of oil production, and what we could do with solar and so forth, and renewables that are out there. Anybody else? Well, very good. Tashke ahana and chukma chinjukma. Thank you for listening. It's been wonderful, and hope we can continue these.
You
Yeah, there's-
mentioned the YouTube video, and I just posted the link to that.
Yeah, there it is. Go to that one, and it really puts it in perspective. What we can do with renewables versus what we're doing now. Which, and just on a side note, Butler County Community College is hosting Mr. Gran. He's an author of Killers of the Flower Moon, of the murders that took place over oil in the early days of the Osage Reservation. He's going to talk at Butler County Community College. I forgot the date, but it is coming up in September. He'll be there in person. So it kind of puts the whole picture of oil and what it's done to not just the land, but to native peoples that have been harmed by it and continue to be, as well as minorities and underprivileged people in communities. So, all right, anybody else have anything?
Well, we're just about at 8:30, so I think we'll end it here then. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you for your presentation, Kent.
You're welcome.
We hope to do more of these on other subjects, so stay tuned.
Yeah, and there it is in the chat from Holger speaking at here locally. So, yeah, if you want to go hear that. I grew up with the Osage, so I really wanted to talk to him a little bit in person. So, hey, all right. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.